faithfully delivering value, interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Club. Today, the book we'll be discussing is Status Anxiety. By status, we mean a person's position in society, and status anxiety is our worry about our social standing. We worry that we can't live up to society's model of success, thus losing dignity and respect. We worry that our current social status is too mediocre to stand out. This anxiety is pervasive. Whether we're thriving or struggling, it's hard to shake off. Why do we suffer from status anxiety, and how can we relieve this distress?
That is status anxiety.
This is the book's central focus. The author is Alain de Botton, a British intellectual who graduated from Cambridge with profound philosophical expertise. He also has extensive knowledge of Western literature and art. On Sally's Book Club, we've previously covered his works, The Consolations of Philosophy and The Art of Travel. In Status Anxiety, de Botton meticulously dissects modern status anxiety and explores ways to alleviate it through philosophy, art, and politics. We'll explore the book's main content through three aspects. First, why people develop status anxiety and why it's increasing today. Second, why modern status anxiety primarily centers on wealth concerns. Third, how we can resolve this anxiety. All right, for part one, why do people experience status anxiety? Actually, worrying about social status is somewhat a luxury. In times of dire poverty, few fretted over status. Status anxiety only emerges when basic needs are secured. As societies grow affluent, more people crave prominent status, fueling this anxiety. In other words, status anxiety is an affliction of prosperity. So why do people desire high status? You might think it's obvious. For fame and fortune, right? Does this even need explaining? But de Botton offers an answer you likely wouldn't expect. Love. He says the underlying drive behind pursuing high status is the desire for love. Money, fame, and influence are merely symbols or pathways to obtain love, not the ultimate goal. Here, love doesn't refer to intimate emotions, but to attention and regard. Gaining others' love means gaining their notice. People notice our presence, remember our names, listen to our opinions, forgive our faults, and care for our needs. Craving attention and recognition is a fundamental psychological need. Adam Smith frankly wrote in The Theory of Moral Sentiments, "Why do we toil and hustle in this world? To be noticed, cared for, and to receive sympathy, praise, and support. That's the value we seek from all actions." Psychologist William James noted in The Principles of Psychology, "The cruelest punishment is granting freedom while treating someone as invisible. When they appear, no one bothers to glance their way. When they speak, no one responds or notices their actions." Let's reflect. Doesn't an absent-minded compliment from a coworker brighten your whole morning, while a hung-up call or unanswered text can ruin your day? De Botton compares ourselves to a leaky balloon, constantly needing others' love to stay inflated. Others' neglect can instantly puncture it. Most who grow up in healthy families receive unconditional parental love as children. But entering society, we must strive for success to earn respect, attention, and admiration. Because this is a snobbish world, status dictates how others treat you. When poor, no one visits you in busy streets. When rich, distant relatives seek you in remote mountains. Success brings flattery, failure brings abandonment. In other words, the reason we crave higher social status and feel anxious is because deep down we're always yearning for others' love and attention. So why is status anxiety more widespread today than ever before? De Botton's answer is a bit surprising. He says it's because human society has progressed and the idea of equality has spread. Today, people believe everyone's born equal and has the right to pursue what they want. But this concept is very advanced. For a long time in history, the dominant view was that inequality between people is normal. For example, Christianity preached that social class inequality is unchangeable because the strict hierarchy under papal rule reflected the heavenly order. Ancient China wasn't influenced by Christianity, but it upheld hierarchical orders like ruler-subject and father-son relationships. In short, in traditional societies, most people accepted social injustice. If born unluckily at the bottom, they just endured and adapted. Modernity changed all that. Modernization not only boosted productivity massively, but also brought fundamental social changes and the new ideal of equality for all. For the first time ever, those at society's bottom realized everyone could climb to the top of the social pyramid and got eager to try. Alexis de Tocqueville, the brilliant French thinker and author of The Old Regime and the Revolution, noticed this early on. While visiting America, Tocqueville found that social equality greatly affects people's emotions and psychology. In his book, Democracy in America, he wrote that nations ruled by royalty and nobility, despite flaws, had pleasures hard for modern folks to imagine. People back then believed everything was predestined and never thought about changing their status. Thus, they felt no hostility toward their hardships, no resentment, and no sense of degradation or shame. You could see lots of inequality in that society, but you wouldn't see people's hearts shamed by it. It should be noted that Tocqueville wasn't trying to revive the old feudal aristocratic system. He knew that in modern Western societies, the masses' material lives far surpass those of the medieval lower classes. But he also saw that despite gaining so much, modern people can no longer enjoy the spiritual tranquility of medieval commoners. This is the paradox of modernity. Today's society is more equal than the past. Theoretically, everyone can change their fate, elevate status, and achieve success. In such a system, it's hard for people to escape the pursuit of status. Even if you're naturally indifferent to fame, society constantly reminds you to strive, chase dreams, and bravely achieve them. Since the early 19th century, autobiographies of self-made successes have filled bookshelves. Those overwhelming inspirational stories all shout at you, work hard! Any change is possible. As long as you know what you want and decide to do it, nothing can stop you. Mass media strongly promotes success culture, focusing almost exclusively on elites' achievements while implying ordinary lives are trivial. Yet in any society, only a tiny fraction reach the pyramid's top, meaning few actually stand out. Most who work hard still can't change their status, developing anxiety about worthlessness and failure. Actually, those at the top are anxious too. Modern society is a rapidly changing, unpredictable system. This system's core feature is overwhelming uncertainty. Successful people fear being overtaken. They may be more anxious than ordinary folks, because losing what you've gained hurts more than never having it. But mainstream culture today doesn't encourage lowering expectations or accepting mediocrity. Instead, it makes people imagine they're climbing toward happiness. Just conquer this cliff and bliss awaits. The truth is, even at the peak, we'll return to the valley, back in anxiety and despair. All right, let's summarize part one. People's concern and pursuit of social status is essentially a craving for others' love and attention. In rigidly hierarchical traditional societies, people couldn't change their status, but modernization and equality ideals sparked widespread aspirations for social mobility, thus plunging into status anxiety. Now for part two, why is modern status anxiety so fixated on material wealth? Why can't we control our craving for money and envy of the wealthy? First, understand that throughout history, wealth didn't always mean status. Different eras valued different standards. For example, in 400 BC Sparta, muscular warriors were most revered. They despised commerce and luxury but glorified combat. Spartans never used money. Being seen in markets brought disgrace. In medieval Western Europe, Christian saints commanded the highest respect. They renounced material comforts, suppressed desires, and strictly followed Christ's teachings. Take Saint Bernard, a highly revered example. Reportedly, he walked extremely slowly with eyes fixed on the ground, fearing to step on ants, God's creatures. In 18th to 19th century Britain, gentlemen were most admired, their key trait being perfected lazy elegance. Thus, frequent barber visits for impeccable hairstyles were top priorities. Crucially, Mastering the minuet dance was essential. In 1751, Lord Chesterfield stressed dance techniques to his son. Graceful arm movements, proper hand extensions, and hat etiquette, all vital for gentlemen. In these three examples, revered status had little to do with wealth. In past Western societies, the rich often had poor reputations despite their money. Westerners once believed all social classes were essential and interdependent. Peasants at society's bottom, though poor, were respected as wealth creators, while the rich were seen as corrupt exploiters who stole from the poor.
Wicked and corrupt through and through.
French Enlightenment thinker Rousseau first articulated this.
Rousseau argued that the powerful initially gained status through plunder.
A century after Rousseau, Marx revitalized this argument. With new vigor, Marx asserted capitalism itself is an exploitative system where capitalists profit from workers' surplus value. What's called return on investment is just a polite term for theft. So why did modern society equate wealth with status? The Botton believes three new narratives emerged since the 18th century, becoming mainstream in the 20th and reversing attitudes toward rich and poor. The first new narrative, the rich, not the poor, are truly socially beneficial. In 1723, London, physician Bernard Mandeville published The Fable of the Bees, Private Vices, Public Benefits. It argued people's worth shouldn't be measured by their souls, but by their impact on others. By this standard, the rich contribute far more to society than the underprivileged. Mandeville's view was scandalous at the time.
Yet nearly all economists and politicians since the 18th century adopted it.
Most influential was economics founding father Adam Smith, who wrote in The Wealth of Nations that industrialists' ambition expands societal wealth. If entrepreneurs are big fish and workers small fish, big fish aren't eating small fish.
Rather, they help small fish. Their spending creates jobs.
Through this rhetoric, the rich transformed from villains to heroes. Their lavish lifestyles suddenly served public welfare. How noble! Now, the second narrative, the wealthy aren't greedy, but exceptionally capable. This perspective also emerged from societal equalization. In traditional societies, positions were determined by lineage, but 18th century equality ideals replaced aristocracy with meritocracy. Gradually, people began believing one's abilities determined social status. This perception gave money moral significance. Wealth became symbolic of virtue, implying the rich aren't just wealthy, but superior. Thus, money transformed from means to end itself. American economist Thorstein Veblen summarized this perfectly. He said in commercial societies, the idea that one can be moral yet poor has no traction. However indifferent to wealth, everyone feels compelled to accumulate and display it, or face anxiety and self-blame. The final narrative targets the poor. While the rich are glorified as creators and achievers, the poor are labeled competition losers. Their poverty is blamed on stupidity and incompetence. By this logic, the rich needn't feel guilty about luxury, nor offer help or sympathy to the poor. Industrialist Carnegie wrote in his autobiography, "Charity is pointless. Funds go to drunkards who harm society. Truly needy rarely ask, and worthy people never beg." Social Darwinism advocating survival of the fittest
Took it further. The poor are weaklings who lost societal competition.
the best solution? Eliminate them to prevent dragging down humanity. These three narratives fundamentally transformed attitudes toward rich and poor. Everyone craves wealth, while poverty became a mark of shame, a symbol of stupidity or failure. You might still ask, why? Why? Why did these pro-wealth notions become mainstream? Marx's famous words answer this. Marx once said, "The dominant ideas of any era are usually those of the ruling class." In societies controlled by landowners, stable hierarchies were considered natural. They needed land ownership and inheritance to maintain status. But in capitalist societies, wealth dominates our imagination of success. Because related concepts like entrepreneurship and materialism essentially served capitalists. In this light, our craving for wealth and status anxiety are just symptoms. The deeper reality, we're fully trapped under capitalist ideology. All right, let's summarize part 2. Different eras and civilizations valued different status standards. Modern capitalism introduced new narratives that inverted long-standing attitudes toward rich and poor, framing the wealthy as creators and achievers, trapping everyone in wealth obsession. Now for part 3, how to resolve status anxiety. The Botton says there are many good approaches. First, we can learn from philosophers. Since ancient Greece, philosophers have been iconoclasts, untouched by status anxiety. They remained unshaken by fame or scorn, leaving fascinating stories, like Socrates exclaiming in Athens, "Look at all these things I don't want," seeing people parade jewels. When Alexander the Great asked philosopher Diogenes if he needed help, Diogenes replied, "Yes, step aside, you're blocking my sunlight." Someone excitedly told Antisthenes that Athenians were praising him. Antisthenes retorted, "Why? Did I do something wrong?" Sounds punchable, but this unflappable attitude is enviable. So, how did philosophers achieve this? Through their secret weapon, reason. They first use reason to analyze others' opinions, positive or negative, to see if they're valid, thus discovering that popular opinions are often riddled with confusion and errors. That's why German philosopher Schopenhauer advised youth to care less about others and embrace solitude. Because most people's character is crude, cruel, foolish, and numb. And if someone isn't wicked, they're likely unbearably dull. Philosophers even reveal how conventional views can be deeply flawed and safely ignored. For instance, French philosopher Chamfort declared public opinion the worst kind. It rejects reason, relying on intuition and tradition. Thus, any widely held belief is profoundly foolish, simplistic, illogical, biased, and shallow. Chamfort even said so-called common sense should be called common stupidity. We might not match Chamfort or Schopenhauer's cynicism, but we can learn philosophers' healthy disdain, especially using reason to filter opinions, letting our own mind define us and discern true needs. Our fears often deserve fear. Beyond philosophy, art also soothes status anxiety. If philosophy uses reason to analyze others, art builds empathy to deeply understand them, shattering status stereotypes. Satirical cartoons, for example, reveal how great figures aren't so admirable. After Napoleon crowned himself emperor, British artist Gilray drew The First Emperor of France. It depicted Napoleon's grand coronation procession as a bloated, arrogant, swaggering emperor leading sycophants and prisoners. Napoleon flew into rage seeing it, ordering anyone bringing it to France jailed without trial.
He also filed a formal diplomatic protest through the ambassador in London, vowing to hunt down the cartoonist if he ever conquered England.
And Napoleon's rage stemmed from knowing humor isn't just play. It's potent protest that deflates grandeur, punctures halos, and eases society's excessive envy of elites. Meanwhile, great literature and art help us empathize with ordinary people. As de Botton wrote, it helps us appreciate the value of every mundane life resting in unvisited graves. He illustrated this with an example. In summer 1848, several Normandy newspapers reported briefly on Delphine Delamare, a 27-year-old seamstress in a small town, increasingly unhappy in her marriage. After taking a lover and overspending on clothes and furniture, she fell deep into debt. Then, under emotional and financial pressure, she swallowed arsenic. Her suicide left a young daughter and distraught husband. To most readers, this was just gossip. But one reader, novelist Flaubert, let the story simmer for 3 years before writing. When Madame Delamare became Madame Bovary, a Western literary icon, her life transcended black and white morality tales. The news item seemed only to show youth's disregard for marriage, society's commercialization, and religious decline. Flaubert's novel explored motivations deeply. We witness her childhood, convent days, mismatched marriage, and finally swallowing arsenic. Readers no longer judge, but understand. This is art's power. True art always opposes crude moralizing, igniting sensitivity, helping us grasp human complexity, feel others' pain, and heal through empathy. The Botton also specifically suggests that if people are particularly anxious about wealth issues, they should pay special attention to something. Bohemian art. The bourgeoisie determines a person's social status based on commercial success and public reputation. For bohemians, the most important thing is to experience and understand the world, focusing on art as observers or creators, so they use bohemian art to counter it. This directly addresses status anxiety. For example, a representative of bohemian art is Dadaism, which was popular in the last century. In 1915, Tristan Tzara, the founder of Dadaism, declared in Zurich that smart people have become common, but what we lack now are idiots. Dada uses all its power to create idiots worldwide. Then, he and his followers stormed into elegant restaurants, shouting at the bourgeoisie who were dining. Famous Dada artist Marcel Duchamp drew a mustache on the Mona Lisa. And Dadaist poet Hugo Ball wore clothes made of shiny blue cardboard, a witch's hat, and recited his poetry. These poems were pieced together from multiple languages, with no concrete meaning. All this art uses superficial absurdity to expose and satirize the bourgeoisie's superficiality. Now, there's another way that can effectively help people alleviate status anxiety. But this method sounds a bit uncomfortable. Thinking about death. When we're healthy and successful, we rarely question whether others' praise and flattery are sincere. We often don't want to think about whether others respect me or my social status. But if we assume we're dying soon, imagine who would rush to the hospital to visit us at our deathbed and who would genuinely feel sorrow. Thinking this way, we may realize that obsessing over others' opinions is a waste of time and life. Contemplating death brings truth back to life. We'll discover that many of our desires have nothing to do with our true needs. We always delay doing what we truly love, as if there's always enough time. And imagining our impending death makes us see and willing to pursue the lifestyle we most desire deep down. Botton humorously points out that, besides contemplating our own mortality, we can also overcome status anxiety by thinking about others' deaths, especially the deaths of those who make us feel inferior or jealous. No matter how tough our lives or how high others' achievements, death is the ultimate equalizer. The Botton believes the best way to soothe the anxious isn't saying everything will be okay, but admitting everything will ultimately turn terrible. Roofs will collapse, cities crumble, we'll die, and everyone we love will pass away. All our achievements, even our names, will be buried underground. That's the most effective and ultimate comfort, because viewing our petty status anxiety from a 1,000-year perspective reveals our insignificance, bringing peace. This comfort method stems from Christian ethics, but it resonates with China's reflections on rise and fall, too. Do you think whether it's realizing success or failure vanishes in a blink, or sighing, pure white covers the earth, both help us face life's upheavals with grace? All right, let's summarize part 3. Philosophy, art, and contemplating death all help relieve status anxiety. Philosophy teaches rational evaluation of others' views. Art shatters status stereotypes. And thinking about death reveals our heart's truest desires. With that, we've nearly covered the book's main content. But Botton adds 2 final reminders. First, status anxiety itself, however unpleasant, has positive aspects too. As the saying goes, only the anxious succeed. There's truth in that. Feeling anxious about status can push us to maximize our talents. Botton's second reminder: no matter how hard we try, we'll never fully escape status anxiety. But discussing and understanding it is like weather forecasting. Predicting a storm doesn't stop it, but prepares us. But the info it gives at least tells us where the storm comes from, how strong it is, and when it'll end, so we're not totally helpless when disaster hits. Same goes for understanding status anxiety. It doesn't stop it from happening, but it helps us get what's going on and how to deal with it. Starting from understanding, we can challenge the roots of status anxiety to build a better world. All right, that's status anxiety. That's all for this book's interpretation. Reading notes are below the audio. Catch you next time.